My daughter took my apartment and moved in with her fiancé. She didn't know I owned the whole building. I lived in a small, weathered apartment on the third floor of an old brick building in Pittsburgh, the kind of place where the hallway lights flicker like restless ghosts and the elevator groans out dark secrets from decades past. My unit breathed with the nostalgic aroma of wood polish and coffee, exactly the same as it did 40 years ago. The furniture was old, but solid as fortresses, built by hands that once hoisted steel beams and scrubbed factory floors through 12 grueling hours. Now, those same battle-worn hands trembled slightly as I folded laundry and stirred oatmeal. The neighbors knew me only as Mr. Ray, the quiet old man who kept his head down and his shoes polished like mirrors. They had no idea I'd been a janitor for 42 relentless years, or that I'd never missed a single shift, never called in sick once. They didn't know about the blood, sweat years I worked double shifts just to afford braces for my daughter. They only saw the faded baseball caps and the same brown jacket I wore like armor every single day. That's exactly how I wanted it. I never craved spotlights. I craved peace. After my wife Margaret passed, the silence became deafening. I stopped playing the radio altogether. Her gentle humming used to breathe life into these rooms. Her teacup still sat untouched on the shelf like a sacred shrine. I dusted around it every Saturday like a holy ritual. Some nights I'd stare at her photograph until my eyes blurred with tears. She was my anchor, my explosive joy. And since she left, I'd learned to survive on memories and the lonely sound of my own breathing. My daughter, Sophia, used to visit often during that first devastating year. She'd bring soup, sink into the couch, and laugh at my jokes like heavenly music. But life has a cruel way of sweeping young people forward like a riptide. Soon, she was calling less, then barely at all. When she did visit, she'd glance at her phone more than at me. I never said a word. I refused to make her feel guilty. That's not what fathers do. She got engaged last year, a man named Carter. Rich family, sky-high expectations. I met him once, hands soft as silk, words polished like diamonds, and a Rolex that flashed like an arrogant beacon. He shook my hand like he was granting me a royal favor. I smiled anyway, because I'm just the janitor father, the one who probably embarrassed her. That's how Carter looked at me with those cold eyes. And I saw it, just for one devastating second, reflected in Sophia's eyes too. Still, I loved her fiercely. I never stopped. Every night I set 2 plates at the table, even if only one would ever be used. I saved every text she sent like precious treasure. I reread her childhood birthday cards like sacred scriptures. It didn't matter how far she drifted away. She was my girl, the only thing that ever mattered more than my own wounded pride. So I stayed silent, watched from the shadows, let her grow wings, even knowing it meant she might never fly back home. I knew exactly how people saw me. Old man in worn jeans, shuffling slowly to the corner store. People hold doors for me now, speak louder when they address me. But they don't know what I know. They don't know what I've built in the shadows, what I've saved. The fortune I've hidden behind broom handles and grease-stained coveralls. And maybe one day they'll discover the explosive truth. But not yet. Not until the truth comes knocking like a hurricane. And believe me, it will. It was on a grey Tuesday that I heard thunderous knocks hammering against my door. Nearly 11 a.m. and I'd already savoured my coffee and tenderly watered my plants. I never received visitors at that ungodly hour. When I opened the door, there stood Sophia, beautiful as always, but rushing like she was fleeing a crime scene. She wore dark sunglasses even inside the dim building, an expensive coat draped over her shoulders, and a perfume that flooded the hallway with the scent of luxury and cold distance. "Hi, Dad," she said without an embrace. She just walked straight in, as if my home were nothing more than a waiting room. She surveyed the place with an expression I didn't recognize, a toxic blend of impatience and judgment, as if the sofa where she once watched cartoons as a child had transformed into something shameful. She perched on the edge of the armchair and immediately started fidgeting with her phone. "You need to sell this apartment, Dad. It's old, tiny. It's falling apart." Those words hit me like a sledgehammer. I smiled, desperately trying to understand. "Sell? But why?" Sophia crossed her legs and looked at me like a teacher explaining something painfully obvious to a slow child. "Look, Carter is closing a deal with a construction company. They want to buy this entire building. And you, well, you're the only tenant who hasn't agreed to sell yet. I told them you'd be on board." The way she spoke made my throat constrict. She hadn't even consulted me, hadn't asked what I wanted. She'd already decided my fate. I tried to explain that I didn't want to leave this place. This was my sanctuary. Every corner of this home held a sacred piece of my life with Margaret. But Sophia sighed, visibly annoyed. "Dad, for God's sake, you're just some old retiree. This place has no value anymore. Carter says the money could be invested much better." It was like being slapped across the face, not because of the words themselves, but because of the tone, the Arctic coldness. She ran her fingers across the coffee table and grimaced in disgust. "Besides, look at this. Ancient furniture, grimy carpet, musty smell." I felt something crushing my chest like a vice. It wasn't anger, it was soul-deep disappointment. This wasn't my daughter anymore. This was someone molded by another world, a world where memories are worthless and appearances are everything. "Do you know what this house means to me, Sophia?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. But she was already standing, ready to escape. "Think about what's best, Dad. We'll talk later." And she stormed out without a backward glance. The sharp clicking of her heels echoing down the staircase was louder than any scream. I stood there, frozen in the living room, breathing in her lingering perfume mixed with the scent of ancient wood. And for the first time in years, I realized that maybe she had truly left me. Not just physically, but forever. I looked toward the bookshelf, where her childhood photograph still smiled from a silver frame, and I understood with crystal clarity. It was time to show her who I really was. Not the frail old man she thought she knew, but the man who had built an empire in absolute silence. That evening, I sat in the haunting light of the living room, staring at Margaret's photograph on the mantel like a man seeking absolution. Her smile hadn't changed in that picture for 20 years, but the world around it had crumbled and rebuilt itself. I poured myself a glass of scotch, the expensive bottle I saved for moments that would define everything, and let silence wrap around me like a funeral shroud. Sophia had transformed into someone I could barely recognize through the fog of disappointment. And now she was trying to rip away the only thing that still felt like home. But I wasn't angry. No, I was patient as a predator. Patience had built my entire life from nothing. Everyone thought I had retired early because of failing health. The truth was a bombshell. I had stopped working because I didn't need to anymore. Decades ago, when Margaret and I were young and possessed nothing but burning dreams and a cramped one-bedroom apartment, I started investing, quietly, relentlessly, like a man possessed. I devoured books when others numbed themselves with TV. I saved every penny when others threw money away like confetti. I learned when others laughed at my ambition. They all thought I was just a janitor, an invisible man who cleaned floors and mopped up after arrogant office workers. And I was, but that was never the complete story. Behind the scenes, like a shadow empire, every month I bought shares, utilities, railroads, tech before it exploded like fireworks. I learned how the market moved the same way I learned to buff floors, slow, steady, methodical as a surgeon. No gambling, no shortcuts. Just iron discipline. By the time I retired, I had accumulated a quiet fortune that would make kings weep. $12 million scattered across portfolios, properties, and trusts like buried treasure. I never told Sophia, not out of spite, but out of desperate love. She was different, even as a teenager. fascinated by wealth like a moth to flame, obsessed with image above substance. I didn't want to feed that monster. I wanted her to become her own person, not someone who waited for a check like a vulture. But now she was back, not because she missed me, not because she cared about her dying father, but because she wanted what she thought I had, a pathetic apartment and a chunk of retirement cash. She had absolutely no idea what storm was coming. I opened the drawer in my ancient oak desk and took out the envelope I had written years ago with trembling hands. To Sophia, when the time is right. Inside was a letter. Not just any letter. It was a treasure map. A guide to everything I had built in the shadows, a list of accounts that would make her dizzy, names, passwords, instructions that would change her world forever. And at the very top, it read in my careful handwriting, "To the daughter I hope will someday value truth more than wealth." I put the letter back, untouched like a loaded weapon. The time wasn't right. Not yet. She needed to see with her own eyes who she was really dealing with. Not a week-old man rotting in a dusty apartment, but a man who had mastered silence, patience, and legacy, like a chess grandmaster planning the final devastating move. A week later, Sophia called me again, not to apologize, not to ask how I was surviving, but to invite me to dinner like summoning a servant. "Ethan's family wants to meet you," she said with the warmth of a business transaction. Ethan was her fiancé, some privileged tech consultant from California who'd never worked a real day in his life. I paused before answering, my heart sinking like a stone. Her tone told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a warm gesture. This was a performance. I was the old man she was ashamed of, the janitor father she needed to fit neatly into her new glittering world, like a dirty secret. I accepted the invitation, not out of pride, but out of burning curiosity. I wanted to see exactly what kind of people she thought she belonged to now. The restaurant was one of those soul-crushing places where they don't print prices on the menu because if you have to ask, you don't belong. The waiters wore suits more expensive than my entire wardrobe. I showed up in my usual dark wool coat, pressed shirt, and mirror-polished shoes. I may not flash designer labels, but I know how to look like a man who's lived through wars. Sophia looked terrified the moment she saw me. "Dad," she said quickly, her eyes scanning me like a security checkpoint for any trace of embarrassment. "Try not to talk too much tonight, okay?" The words hit me like bullets. Ethan gave me a handshake like he was greeting the help. His parents, Robert and Elaine, smiled with lips tighter than prison bars. "So, you're retired?" Robert asked, twirling his wine like a weapon. I nodded with dignity, intact. "Yes, sir. I did janitorial work for 35 years. Elaine's smile twitched like she'd smelled something rotten. The air thickened with suffocating judgment. The meal dragged on like torture. I listened. I watched like a hawk. Robert boasted about investments he barely understood, throwing around numbers like confetti. Ethan bragged about golf scores and apps he didn't code, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. And all the while, I sat there, invisible as furniture. At one point, Ethan chuckled like a hyena and said, "Sophia tells us you never really planned for retirement. That must be devastating. But hey, you raised a daughter smart enough to marry up." I looked at him for a long, dangerous moment and simply said, "I suppose we all find our own way to survive." Sophia said absolutely nothing. She didn't defend me. She wouldn't even look at me. She stared at her wine glass and pretended to laugh like an actress in a bad play. That was the moment I knew with crushing certainty. Not only had I lost my daughter to greed, but she no longer even remembered who I was. I had become a character in her story, a plot device to make her seem more triumphant. The poor father, the humble background, her stepping stone to glory. I left the dinner early like escaping a burning building. I told them I had something urgent to handle. Truth is, I couldn't sit through another second of their poison. Outside, the cold wind hit my face like divine intervention. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't drink myself into oblivion. I didn't even feel angry. I felt electrifyingly awake. They wanted to mock a janitor. Fine. Let them feast on their arrogance. But soon, very soon, they would learn something money couldn't buy. The earth-shattering power of a man who built his legacy with absolute silence. That night, after the soul-crushing dinner, I walked into my study, the one sacred place no one ever cared to investigate. It was a small room at the back of the house, lined with ancient filing cabinets, a battle-scarred desk, and a locked drawer that hadn't been opened in years, like a buried treasure chest. Inside that drawer was a folder, thick, worn and bursting with something no one expected a janitor to possess. Documents, stock certificates, property deeds, and passwords to accounts most people would never believe I owned in their wildest dreams. See, I wasn't always just a janitor. Before Sophia was born, I studied finance at night, like a man possessed while working crushing cleaning jobs during the day. I never made reckless bets or chased get-rich-quick schemes. I bought slow, steady, and early like a predator stalking prey. Real estate when it was dirt cheap, dividend stocks before anyone talked about them on YouTube. A little gold, a little tech, strategic moves that would make Wall Street wolves weep. I never bragged. I never upgraded my car or flashed wealth like a peacock. I lived below my means, and I read voraciously every single night. When Sophia was a child, I used to tuck her in with gentle kisses, then spend 2 more grueling hours balancing ledgers like a mathematician solving the universe. Over the decades, I built something magnificent, quietly, invisibly. No one asked, so I never told a soul. My late wife knew before she passed into eternity. We had planned a quiet retirement together, a simple life, maybe a small cabin in Oregon where we could watch sunsets. But after she died, I buried everything, my crushing grief, my hidden fortune, my very voice. I became the janitor Sophia remembers, not because I was poor, but because I was done talking to a world that didn't deserve my words. The world had already stolen the woman I loved. I had nothing left to prove to anyone breathing, until now. I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts like opening vault doors, one by one. The balances stared back like silent armies. My portfolio, real estate empire, and a few discrete business shares scattered like landmines. Altogether, just over $12.3 million and growing like a living thing. I could buy Ethan's pathetic startup and incinerate it the next morning if I wanted. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about revenge, not yet. This was about reclaiming something sacred. My name, my dignity, my daughter's respect. I printed the most recent summaries and placed them in a clean black folder. No logos, no fancy leather, just truth. Cold, documented, life-changing truth. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it. But I knew this with absolute certainty. The man they laughed at wasn't broken. He was just patient as death itself. And patience, when fueled by righteous purpose, becomes something very, very dangerous. The days after that soul-crushing dinner passed in a haze of deceptive routine. I kept my mornings identical, slow coffee-like ritual, the morning paper folded on the table like sacred text, and a walk down neighborhood streets where the leaves rustled like whispered conspiracies. But inside, something seismic was shifting. I wasn't just the tired old man anymore. I was a warrior, sharpening his resolve, ready to rewrite his story in blood and fire. I began reaching out quietly to a few trusted allies, people I hadn't spoken to in years, old carpentry colleagues turned small business owners and property managers who remembered when my word was gold. We spoke in hushed tones, careful to avoid drawing unwanted attention. It was like assembling the pieces of a deadly chessboard, each move calculated with surgical precision, each contact a step closer to devastating checkmate. At home, I started organizing documents I'd buried like treasure. Letters, contracts, stock certificates, and deeds carefully filed away like weapons in an arsenal. The folder containing the portfolio summaries sat on my desk like a throne. a silent promise of earth-shaking power. My hands, though weathered and battle-scarred from decades of honest work, handled the papers with religious reverence. This was my legacy, quiet, unassuming, and indestructible as granite. Sophia called twice during those electric weeks, her voice trembling with hesitation and fear. She left messages dripping with pathetic excuses and veiled apologies that fooled no one. But I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to speak to the daughter who had betrayed me, who had let a stranger's poison influence erase years of love and sacrifice. Not yet. Not until she was ready to face the truth. Every evening, I walked past the lobby of the building, the one she now called home, like a fortress of lies. A small "for sale" sign appeared, almost hidden, but to me it blazed like a beacon of divine justice. It was the first real move in a plan years in the making, pieces falling into place like dominoes. I wasn't running from my past. I was preparing to claim my rightful future. I reminded myself daily that patience was my deadliest weapon. I didn't need to rush like an amateur. They thought me powerless, an old man forgotten and discarded. But true power doesn't always roar like thunder. Sometimes it waits, silent and steady as granite, like the tide before a hurricane. I polished my shoes until they gleamed like mirrors, pressed my shirts until they were sharp as blades, and rehearsed my calm voice until it was steady as steel. When the moment came, and it would come soon, I would not stumble. I would speak with the clarity of absolute truth. I would show them exactly who I really was. And this time, they would never, ever forget. One evening, Sophia called again. This time, her voice was different, softer, trembling with uncertainty like a child lost in the dark. "Dad, we need to talk," she whispered. But I could hear the desperation beneath her words, like a fragile mask finally cracking under pressure. I agreed to meet her at the apartment, the place I had called home for decades, and now was about to become a devastating battleground. When I arrived, the air felt electric with tension. The furniture had been rearranged like pieces on a chessboard, and fresh paint still reeked on the walls, like the scent of betrayal. Sophia and Ethan greeted me with strained smiles that looked like grimaces, the kind that don't quite reach the eyes and fool absolutely no one. They wanted this meeting to be quick, surgical, a way to close a chapter and move on without messy complications or uncomfortable truths. I listened like a predator as they spoke about plans to renovate, sell, or rent the building. Carter's oily voice slithered through the room, dripping with financial jargon and dismissive comments about outdated assets. Sophia sat quietly, no longer the rebellious daughter I remembered, but a woman trapped between two worlds, one she had chosen in greed and one she had abandoned in shame. Then, like drawing a sword, I pulled out the folder, the one bursting with years of silent work, sacrifice, and calculated planning. I laid it on the table with the weight of destiny. "This isn't just an apartment, Sophia," I said with deadly calm. "This building, every brick, every floor, every breath of air in it, belongs to me. I bought it long before you were even born." Their faces transformed, like watching a car crash in slow motion. Surprise morphing into disbelief, then crashing into pure confusion. Ethan laughed nervously, his voice cracking like a teenager, thinking it was some pathetic joke. But I showed them the papers, like revealing royal decrees, deeds, contracts, bank statements that would make their heads spin. The truth settled over the room like poisonous fog. The man they thought was powerless was, in fact, the absolute owner of their entire future. Sophia's eyes flooded with tears that could have filled oceans, not just from earth-shattering shock, but from the crushing weight of her own catastrophic mistakes. She realized how utterly blind she'd been, how completely she'd underestimated the man who had sacrificed everything to raise her. The daughter who had once been ashamed now looked at me with a toxic mixture of regret and awe that burned like acid. For the first time in years, I saw a glimpse of the little girl who used to sit on my lap and call me her hero with sparkling eyes. And I knew with crystal certainty this was only the beginning of her education. The room plunged into suffocating silence after I laid the folder on the table like a death sentence. Sophia's hands trembled violently as she reached for the papers with desperate fingers, her eyes scanning the mountain of devastating proof. It was a world she'd never imagined existed in her darkest nightmares, a world I had built quietly in the shadows, without fanfare or expectation. The truth hit her like a runaway freight train, obliterating every preconceived notion she held about her father into dust. Ethan, who had been so arrogantly confident moments before, now looked like a deer caught in headlights. He kept glancing frantically between Sophia and me, trying desperately to read the shifting battlefield dynamics. The smug confidence that had defined his entire existence vanished like smoke, replaced by a brittle defensive posture that screamed weakness. I could see the cracks forming in his polished facade like watching glass shatter. The man who once saw me as a pathetic joke was now forced to face a man who commanded absolute respect through quiet, deadly strength. Sophia's voice shattered the silence like breaking crystal. "Why didn't you tell me? Why hide all this from me?" Her question wasn't just about the money. It cut deeper than bone. It was about trust, about years lost in agonizing misunderstanding and missed opportunities that could never be recovered. I looked at her, really looked into her soul, and saw the raw pain beneath the crushing guilt. "Because," I said with gentle devastation, "I wanted you to be more than just the daughter of a janitor. I wanted you to forge your own path without relying on my hidden fortune." Tears streamed down her face like rivers as memories flooded back in crushing waves. The scraped knees I'd bandaged with tender care, the sleepless nights I stayed awake waiting for her to come home safe, the sacrifices no one else ever witnessed or understood. She realized with soul-crushing clarity how much I had given, silently, without ever asking for thanks or recognition. And in that earth-shattering moment, the distance between us began to crumble like ancient walls. Ethan stood abruptly like a man fleeing a fire, mumbling something pathetic about needing to leave immediately. His mask finally slipped completely, revealing the coward beneath. As he walked out the door like a beaten dog, I caught a glimpse of pure desperation in his eyes. A man losing his iron grip on the life he thought he controlled absolutely. Sophia didn't follow. She sat quietly, clutching the papers as if holding on to the last precious thread of her father's love. I stayed with her that night like a guardian angel. We talked about the past, about devastating mistakes, and about what could possibly come next from the ashes. For the first time in years, we spoke with brutal honesty. No judgments, no pretense, no masks. Just a weathered father and his lost daughter trying desperately to rebuild what had been shattered beyond recognition. And somewhere deep inside my battered heart, I felt a flickering ember of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something beautiful and new. The days that followed the earth-shattering revelation were filled with suffocating silences and conversations that walked on broken glass. Sophia stopped avoiding me like a plague, but the wounds were still bleeding, raw as open flesh beneath the surface. She would come over to the apartment more often, but her eyes betrayed a torturous mixture of guilt and confusion, desperately trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the father who had been quietly orchestrating their destiny all along, like a master puppeteer. One afternoon, she sat down across from me at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea like it was her only anchor to sanity. "Dad," she said, her voice shattering like glass, "I don't know how to make this right. I was so blindly focused on what I thought I wanted, I forgot about what actually mattered." I reached out and squeezed her trembling hand with infinite gentleness. "It's not about making it right overnight," I told her with the wisdom of ages. "It's about being brutally honest, about showing up when it matters. That's where real healing begins." We spent countless hours talking like warriors bearing their souls, about her life, her crushing regrets, the catastrophic mistakes she'd made with Ethan, and the ways she desperately wanted to transform herself. I shared stories of my own battles, the sacrifices Margaret and I had made that carved pieces from our hearts, and how I'd always believed in her with religious faith, even when she lost all faith in herself. It wasn't easy. It was like performing surgery without anesthesia, but the walls between us began to crumble like ancient fortresses. I also introduced her to some of the people I'd trusted with my life, old friends weathered by time, business partners who'd watched empires rise, and a lawyer who would help us navigate the treacherous waters of the portfolio. Watching her interact with them, seeing her grow in confidence like a flower reaching for sunlight, filled me with quiet pride that burned like fire in my chest. She was no longer the daughter who hid me away in shame. She was becoming a woman ready to embrace her inheritance in every devastating sense of the word. But not everything was smooth sailing. Ethan's calls came less and less frequently, each one filled with venomous anger and desperate accusations. He couldn't accept that the life he'd planned with surgical precision was slipping through his fingers like sand. Sophia had to make gut-wrenching decisions about her engagement, about who deserved a place in her life moving forward. I stood beside her like a stone guardian, silent but steady, a living reminder of strength and unbreakable resilience. One day, we visited the building together like pilgrims returning to a shrine. The old brick walls, the creaky stairs that sang with history, they were more than just property. They were a symbol of endurance, of legacy carved in stone and sacrifice. Sophia ran her fingers over the worn banister with reverent touch, a small smile breaking through her worry like sunlight through storm clouds. "Maybe it's not just about the money," she whispered with dawning understanding. "Maybe it's about family." And I knew with absolute certainty she was right. The fortune was important. It was power, security, freedom. But healing what was broken, rebuilding what was lost, mending what was shattered, that was absolutely priceless. Together, we were ready to face whatever storms came next, standing as one unbreakable force. The weeks passed like a revelation unfolding, and Sophia's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. She started attending meetings with the financial advisors like a warrior preparing for battle, asking razor-sharp questions she never thought to ask before. The woman who had once been lost in Ethan's suffocating shadow was now carving out her own destiny, one that didn't depend on wealth she didn't earn, but on legacy and responsibility she was beginning to understand with crystal clarity. Watching her step into this new role, I felt a mixture of explosive pride and overwhelming relief. She was finally awakening from her nightmare. Sophia called off her engagement with Ethan after a confrontation that could have shattered glass. He refused to support her newfound independence and continued to belittle her family's quiet wealth like a man spitting on gold. She told me later, her voice steady but raw with the emotion of rebirth, "He saw me as a trophy, not a partner. I finally saw him for the parasite he really is." The relief in her words was palpable as sunlight, but so was the pain that cut like a blade. Ending the relationship wasn't easy. It meant facing crushing loneliness and terrifying uncertainty, but also intoxicating freedom. Meanwhile, I continued to guide her quietly like a master, teaching his apprentice, sharing lessons Margaret and I had learned over decades of blood and sacrifice. About patience that moves mountains, about quiet strength that topples kingdoms, about building something that lasts beyond a lifetime. Sophia absorbed it all like desert sand drinking rain, her confidence growing each day like wildfire. The woman who once was ashamed of me was now walking beside me with fierce pride, a true partner in this unexpected journey of redemption. We started making plans for the building that would make architects weep, restoring it to glory, renting units to long-time tenants who'd been at risk of brutal eviction, and preserving the community that had meant everything to me. Sophia embraced this mission with passionate fire, determined to turn what had been a source of bitter conflict into a symbol of hope and renewal. The neighborhood began to see her not just as a wealthy heiress, but as someone who cared with her entire soul. Ethan's bitterness transformed into desperate madness. He contacted Sophia with venomous threats and wild accusations, trying to manipulate her back into submission like a puppet master pulling strings. But she stood firm as granite, stronger than I'd ever witnessed. Together we drafted a response that could have melted steel, making crystal clear that neither money nor fear would control us anymore. It was a battle of wills that shook the earth, but Sophia had found her voice, and she wasn't going to back down from anyone. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in flames, Sophia took my weathered hand and said with tears of gratitude, "Dad, you gave me more than money. You gave me a chance to become better than I ever dreamed. I'm sorry it took me so long to see the truth." I smiled with the warmth of 1,000 suns, squeezing her hand like holding precious treasure. "It's never too late for redemption," I said with the wisdom of ages. "Legacy isn't just about what you leave behind, it's about who you become along the way." That night, I felt a quiet peace settle over me like a blessing from heaven. The man who once thought his story would end in crushing silence was now living proof that strength can come from patience, love, and a secret kept with perfect discipline. And this was only the beginning of our empire. The days following Sophia's explosive breakup with Ethan were both intoxicatingly liberating and knife-edge tense. Freedom came at a brutal cost, and she was learning that harsh truth with every breath. But with each soul-crushing challenge, she grew stronger like steel forged in fire. No longer the daughter hiding behind others' suffocating expectations, but a warrior woman ready to face her own battles with blazing courage. Her resilience reminded me of Margaret with devastating clarity, fierce and unyielding even in the darkest, most hopeless times. One morning, Sophia surprised me by introducing me to a local community leader named Marcus, a man with commanding presence and an unwavering commitment to the neighborhood that burned like sacred fire. Marcus had been fighting like a gladiator to keep the area from falling into decay, advocating for affordable housing and local businesses with the passion of a crusader. His energy was contagious as lightning, and I saw how much Sophia admired him with eyes that sparkled like stars. I felt a quiet hope blooming. Maybe this powerful alliance could help us rebuild more than just a building. Together, we drafted plans for renovations that respected the building's blood-soaked history and the community's desperate needs. The idea was not just profit, but preservation of something sacred. Sophia's vision was clearer than crystal, sharper than a blade. She wanted to create a place where families could thrive like gardens in sunlight, a home, not just a cold investment. Watching her lead with such volcanic passion was a source of pride I struggled to put into words that could capture its magnitude. Yet, old wounds didn't heal overnight like fairy tale magic. Ethan's toxic presence lingered like a malevolent shadow, sending threatening messages and attempting to sway mutual acquaintances against us with poisonous whispers. It was a vicious battle of influence and power, and Sophia often felt the crushing weight of it like carrying mountains. But she never faltered, never bent, never broke. With Marcus and me by her side like guardian angels, she confronted every challenge head-on, her voice growing stronger with every victorious step. One afternoon, as we met to discuss financing options, a shocking call came in from an unexpected source, a distant relative who had learned of the fortune and wanted to claim a share like a vulture circling carrion. Suddenly, our peaceful mission became tangled in legal disputes and family drama that threatened to strangle everything we'd built. The past was reaching out with claws, trying to drag us back into chaos, but I stood firm as granite mountains. Years of quiet strength had prepared me for this apocalyptic moment. I reminded Sophia that legacy isn't just about money or property. It's about integrity and resilience that can't be purchased or destroyed. We faced the challenges together like an army, ready to protect what we'd built and what we still dreamed of creating from the ashes. At night, I often thought about Margaret, how she would have handled this raging storm with grace and power. I felt her presence like a guiding light cutting through darkness, and I knew with absolute certainty that no matter how fierce the fight became, we would endure like eternal flames. Because family, real family, is forged in the fire of adversity and emerges stronger than diamonds. The call from that distant relative marked the beginning of an apocalyptic new chapter, one filled with unexpected challenges and wounds that cut to the bone. Suddenly, our quiet plans to rebuild were obliterated by legal letters and court summonses that arrived like bombs. It was a brutal reminder that money, no matter how carefully guarded like treasure, always invites conflict like blood draws sharks. But this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for Sophia, for our sacred legacy, and for the future we were trying to build together from ashes. Sophia and I spent countless hours poring over documents with our lawyer like generals planning for war, navigating a treacherous maze of claims and counterclaims that threatened to destroy everything. The relative argued entitlement with venomous fury, casting doubt on decades of careful stewardship. The courtroom drama threatened to obliterate everything we had worked so hard to protect. Watching Sophia face this hurricane with raw courage made me explode with pride, but it also shattered my heart to see her struggle under the crushing weight of family betrayal. Through it all, Marcus remained a steady pillar of support, like an unshakable mountain. He attended hearings like a loyal soldier, rallied community members like a revolutionary, and reminded Sophia that she wasn't alone in this devastating battle. His unwavering faith in our mission helped rekindle her determination, transforming frustration into rocket fuel. I saw a new strength growing in her, the kind that only comes from facing hell itself and refusing to surrender. The media caught wind of the dispute, like vultures smelling death, twisting the story into a sensational headline about family feuds and secret fortunes. Suddenly, our private agony became public entertainment. Sophia was scrutinized like a specimen, criticized like a criminal, and questioned like a suspect. Yet, in the blazing glare of the spotlight, she held her head high like a queen facing execution. She wasn't just a victim, she was a warrior goddess. Late at night, when the world was buried in silence, I reminded her of what mattered most with the intensity of prayer. "This is just another test from the universe," I said softly. "Our legacy isn't measured by what others say or desperately want. It's measured by what we do when no one's watching our souls." She nodded, tears brimming like diamonds, but her resolve unbroken as steel. As the legal battle dragged on like a war of attrition, cracks appeared in the opposing family's story like fractures in glass. Lies surfaced like corpses. Documents were forged like weapons of deception. We began to unravel a web of deception crafted to steal what was never theirs to claim. The truth, once hidden beneath layers of greed and envy, started to shine through like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Sophia and I leaned on each other more than ever, rebuilding trust not just as father and daughter, but as partners in a fight that was bigger than either of us could imagine. Every court hearing, every challenge, only deepened our bond like steel being forged in fire. And through it all, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This storm would pass like all storms do. We would stand stronger on the other side, victorious and unbreakable. The courtroom battles dragged on like an endless war, but slowly, like dawn breaking after the darkest night, the tide began to shift in our favor with unstoppable force. Evidence that once seemed buried under layers of legal jargon and false claims began to surface like buried treasure. Emails, old letters, and bank statements that exposed the truth like lightning illuminating darkness. The opposing family's story started to unravel like cheap fabric, and with every devastating new revelation, Sophia's confidence grew stronger than titanium. I watched her transform before my eyes, like witnessing a phoenix rise from ashes, from a woman weighed down by crushing betrayal to a fighter fueled by righteous justice. Her voice, once hesitant and unsure as a whisper, now rang clear as cathedral bells in every meeting and hearing. She wasn't just fighting for the money, she was fighting for her family's sacred honor, for the life my late wife and I had dreamed of building with our bare hands and bleeding hearts. One afternoon, our lawyer called with news that felt like divine intervention. The judge had ruled in our favor on a critical motion, dismissing several of the opposing claims as baseless lies. The victory wasn't complete, but it was enough to breathe new life into our fight like oxygen to dying flames. Sophia smiled for the first time in weeks, a genuine, hopeful smile that could have lit up entire cities. Outside the courtroom, Marcus helped us rally community support like a general commanding loyal troops. Neighbors came forward with testimonials about the building's sacred importance and our unwavering commitment to preserving it. The media's tone shifted too, from scandalous gossip to stories of resilience and redemption that sang like hymns. The narrative was changing like the tide, just like Sophia herself. Yet the battle wasn't over. Wars never end quietly. The opposing family, desperate and cornered like wounded animals, began to make reckless moves that reeked of desperation. Threats, public accusations, even attempts to intimidate us into submission. But Sophia stood firm as granite mountains, refusing to be cowed by cowards. Together, we had become a united front, a team stronger than any adversary could imagine. In quiet moments, I reminded her of the lessons Margaret had taught me with her dying breath. Strength isn't loud like thunder, it's steady like the ocean. It's the courage to face every challenge with grace and determination that burns like eternal fire. Sophia embodied that spirit now with every breath. I saw in her the daughter I always believed she could be, blazing like a star. As the weeks turned to months, hope blossomed where there had been doubt like flowers after winter. The fortune we'd guarded in silence was no longer just a secret. It was a beacon of light cutting through darkness. And together, we were ready to step into the future we'd fought so hard to claim with our blood, sweat, and tears. The courtroom was packed like a coliseum, tension thick enough to cut with a sword. This was it. The apocalyptic day when everything we had fought for would hang in the balance like souls awaiting judgment. Sophia sat beside me, her hands clenched tightly like a warrior's fists, but her eyes clear and determined as crystal. The distant relative's legal team looked confident like predators before a kill, but I knew better. Years of patience, sacrifice, and quiet strength had prepared us for this moment of destiny. The judge listened intently as thunder as our lawyer laid out the evidence. Irrefutable proof of ownership, crystal clear documentation of the portfolio's origins, and testimonies from longtime neighbors and business partners who spoke like witnesses to gospel truth. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the false claims like hammers destroying lies, exposing greed and deception for all to see in blazing clarity. The courtroom was silent as death, hanging on every word like life itself depended on it. Sophia spoke next, her voice steady as steel, but filled with emotion that could move mountains. She told the story of her family, of a father who had worked tirelessly, like a man possessed, a mother who dreamed quietly with the faith of angels, and a daughter who had lost her way, but found her strength in the fires of adversity. Her words cut through the tension like a blade of pure truth, reaching everyone in the room and touching their souls. I watched with explosive pride as she reclaimed her rightful place like a queen ascending her throne. The opposing lawyer tried to rebut, but his arguments felt hollow as empty graves, desperate as dying gasps. The lies they'd told crumbled under the crushing weight of truth like castles made of sand. When the judge called for closing statements, it was clear who held the moral high ground, like warriors on a mountaintop. Our side, a family united by love, resilience, and an unbreakable bond forged in fire. After what felt like eternal hours, the judge finally spoke with the authority of divine justice. The decision was unanimous. Ownership and control of the portfolio and properties were reaffirmed to me and Sophia with the finality of carved stone. The court ordered the opposing claims dismissed like garbage and warned against further harassment with the voice of thunder. A wave of relief washed over us like cleansing rain after drought. Outside the courthouse, supporters and neighbors cheered softly, their quiet celebration a testament to the epic journey we'd endured through hell and back. Sophia hugged me tightly like holding onto life itself, tears streaming down her face like rivers of joy. We did it, Dad. We really did it. I held her close like protecting precious treasure, knowing this victory was more than legal. It was a triumph of family and truth over darkness and lies. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I thought of Margaret with a heart full of gratitude. I felt her presence, proud and peaceful as starlight. The battle was over, but the future was ours to shape like sculptors with divine clay. Together, Sophia and I would build something lasting, not just wealth, but a legacy of strength, love and redemption that would echo through eternity. With the court's decision behind us, a crushing weight lifted from my shoulders like chains breaking free. The long battle had tested us all like fire testing steel, but the victory brought more than relief. It brought blazing clarity. Sophia and I began to rebuild not just the building and the portfolio, but the sacred trust that had frayed between us over the years like torn fabric. It was time to heal old wounds that had festered too long. We spent mornings walking through the neighborhood like pilgrims on holy ground, meeting tenants and listening to their stories with the reverence of confessors. The community had weathered storms of its own, but there was a quiet resilience, much like our own unbreakable spirit. Sophia's vision extended beyond mere dollars. She wanted to preserve the beating heart of the neighborhood, to create homes filled with hope rather than the fear that had poisoned too many lives. Inside the apartment, Sophia and I began planning renovations like architects of dreams. We met with designers and builders, ensuring the building's blood-soaked history was honored while making it safe and beautiful for the families who lived there like sacred guardians. Every brick repaired was a symbol of renewal, a promise carved in stone that the past would not define our glorious future. Our relationship deepened as well, like roots growing stronger. The daughter who once called me a failure now stood as my partner, her respect and love healing the festering scars of betrayal like divine medicine. We talked openly about the pain, the devastating mistakes, and the forgiveness that followed like sunrise after the darkest night. It wasn't easy. It was like performing surgery on our own hearts. But every honest conversation brought us closer to salvation. Sophia took bold steps to secure her independence, enrolling in business courses and managing parts of the portfolio herself, with the confidence of a born leader. I watched with explosive pride as she grew into her role. Confident as a queen, capable as a general, and determined as a warrior. She wasn't just inheriting wealth, she was building a legacy of her own that would make angels weep with joy. The memories of Margaret lingered softly in the background like gentle blessings, a tender reminder of the strength that comes from love and sacrifice. I often found myself smiling like a man touched by grace, imagining how proud she would be to see us now, stronger than titanium, united as one soul and ready for whatever future awaited us. As the days turned to weeks, a new rhythm settled into our lives, like music finding its perfect harmony. The building thrived like a garden in spring, the community flourished like flowers after rain, and so did our family bond that had been reforged in the fires of adversity. The fortune was no longer a secret or a source of pain, but a foundation for hope that could move mountains. And through it all, I knew with absolute certainty that this new beginning was the greatest victory of all. Greater than money, greater than property, greater than anything the world could offer. We had found each other again, and that was worth more than all the treasure in the universe. The months that followed marked a revolutionary new chapter, not just for Sophia and me, but for the entire neighborhood that had become our kingdom. The building stood tall once more, like a fortress of hope, its walls filled with laughter, dreams, and new beginnings that sparkled like diamonds. Every repaired brick told an epic story of endurance, of a family's quiet strength that refused to be shattered by betrayal or consumed by greed. Sophia had grown into her role with grace and determination that could move mountains. She held meetings with tenants like a benevolent queen, worked side by side with contractors like a warrior, and even began mentoring young women in the community who dreamed of breaking free from their own struggles like caged birds yearning for flight. Watching her become a leader was the greatest gift I could have asked for, a living testament to resilience born from the fires of hardship. Sometimes, on quiet evenings that felt like blessings, I would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the city skyline like liquid gold. I thought about Margaret and how her gentle wisdom had shaped so much of who I was, like a sculptor carving masterpieces. She had taught me that true wealth wasn't counted in dollars, but in the love and legacy we leave behind like eternal flames. Now, I saw that legacy blossoming before my eyes like a garden in paradise. One day, Sophia approached me with a smile I hadn't seen in years, one full of hope and pride that could illuminate entire cities. "Dad," she said with voice trembling with emotion, "I want to start a foundation to help families like ours, those who've been broken but are ready to rebuild from ashes." My heart swelled like an ocean of joy. This wasn't just a fortune or a building, it was a second chance at life, a new purpose rooted in compassion and strength that could change the world. We worked together to set up the foundation like generals, planning a campaign of love, pooling resources, and rallying community support. The mission was clear as crystal: to empower those who had been overlooked, to provide opportunity and stability where it was needed most, like rain in a desert. It was a way to honor Margaret's sacred memory and to turn our pain into something meaningful that would echo through eternity. In the process, Sophia and I grew closer than ever, like two souls becoming one. We had faced darkness together, betrayal, loss, and fierce battles that could have destroyed lesser spirits, but we emerged not just unbroken, but stronger than steel. The wounds healed slowly, replaced by understanding and a deep, unshakable bond forged in fire. The daughter who once saw me as just a retired janitor now stood as my equal, my partner, my pride and joy. As I looked around the neighborhood, I realized with overwhelming gratitude that this was the life I had always wanted to build, one of love, resilience, and hope that could inspire generations. The fortune was not just a hidden secret anymore. It was a beacon for all who believed that no matter how hard life hits, there is always a way forward through the darkness. And so, with the stars shining above like Margaret's blessing, I smiled with the contentment of a man who had found his purpose, knowing that our story, a story of quiet strength, hard-fought justice, and a family reunited by love, was only just beginning to change the world. Life doesn't always turn out the way we expect. Sometimes, the people closest to us hurt us the most, and the weight of betrayal feels unbearable. But as I learned, strength often comes from the quietest places, from patience, from resilience, and from the bonds we rebuild. This story isn't just about money or secrets hidden away. It's about family, forgiveness, and the power to start over. If there's one thing I want you to take away today, it's this: no matter how dark the road seems, there's always hope. Sometimes the greatest victories come after the hardest battles, so hold on, keep fighting, and never forget your worth. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because together we build strength from stories. Until next time, stay strong, stay hopeful.